And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. My guest today is David Baker, David C. Baker. He is an author, he's a speaker, and he's an advisor to entrepreneurial creatives worldwide. He's written 5 books, he's advised over 900 firms, and keynoted conferences in over 30 countries. He co-hosts a very popular podcast called Two Bobs, and I just finished reading his book and I loved it. And his book is called The Business of Expertise: How Entrepreneurial Experts Convert Insight to Impact and Wealth. And I read many books. I read probably 2 books a week, but I really dog-eared this one and scribbled in it and wrote a bunch of notes, and it really spoke to me. So I'm really excited to have you on today, Dave. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. If you need another copy of the book, I'll send it to you. And thank you for not falling asleep while you were reading it. I appreciate that. And thank you for the kind introduction. It's really good to be here. I can't think of a better fit for what really motivates me and the topic of your podcast. So this is fantastic.
Yeah. So you're advising. So your background, if I just sort of recap it, it came from advising creative agencies, other professional services firms on how to do what they do well. And it's obviously gotten broader than that in terms of this business of expertise. So I would argue that all of our listeners, authors, thought leaders, speakers, et cetera, are ultimately in the business of expertise, and in some instances are accidental entrepreneurs. Like it was that expertise that is what drives them. And it's like, oh crap, in order to be an expert, I sort of have to be an entrepreneur. So
right.
Can you talk about that a little bit, where it's sort of, oh geez, yeah, I wouldn't identify as an entrepreneur, but I guess I am one.
Yeah, Michael Gerber decades ago said
Yep.
Entrepreneurs are technicians who have suffered an entrepreneurial seizure, and I think that's true. You could be a really smart advisor, but if you don't understand how to make smart business decisions, you don't know how to sell your services, then it's probably going to fall flat. I think of the target for my audience as the overlap between 2 circles. One would be experts, but there's a lot of experts who are not also entrepreneurs. So experts who are in an entrepreneurial setting, and specifically they're selling their thinking for a living. So, week in and week out, they're standing naked, metaphorically, in front of people and just selling the thoughts in their heads, not deliverables, not what they're doing with their hands. And it's a terrifying world, but it's also a really exciting world to be in. So yes, over the years, it's expanded to consultants, lawyers, engineers, architects, even physicians, just helping them think through how they should position their services.
Yep. So let's talk about it through the lens of the typical listener here, the author, the thought leader, the speaker, et cetera. I mean, they're totally standing out there naked, right? They're getting up there, keynoting and writing and speaking about their stuff, their work, and if folks don't like it, it's either options are bad. Either they don't like your thoughts or they don't like you, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
neither of which makes you feel warm and fuzzy, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, one, the things that you advise folks on the front end with regards to how do you even do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you monetize this expertise that you have? And I agree that it's that expertise entrepreneurial overlap, but again, most of the folks here are coming at it from the expertise lens. That's where they're diving in, and the entrepreneur piece is sort of the vegetables they have to eat to get to the good stuff.
Yeah, and I don't even know how to talk about that anymore without talking about positioning first.
Okay.
And that's because after the world was Googleized, so to speak, in the late 80s, then all of a sudden none of us had a protected geographic market. So anybody could come in and be a replacement for us. I mean, the good news was that we could then go anywhere. So in a moment when any consumer, even in a business setting, could find exactly what they needed almost instantaneously, and in most cases it was free, how in the world are you going to make money on your expertise, which gets right to the question that you were asking. And I think it has to be positioning. So we have to say yes a lot at the beginning of our practices because we're just trying to make enough money to live.
Yes.
But then we have to say no most of the time. And we need to narrow our focus so that we become irrelevant to almost everybody that talks to us. But in the process, we become incredibly relevant to just a very, very small segment. And those people, you're talking on the phone with them, and all of a sudden they say to you, and this will happen repeatedly. Wow, it feels like you have a camera in my office.
Yep.
So starts with that positioning, right? And from there, I would say, and it's impossible to take step 2 without step 1, but step 2 is calculating how many points of view you have that are unique. They're not controversial just to be controversial,
Sure.
but there are and we've all experienced both competence and incompetence. I remember for the first 3.5 years of my practice, I felt like I was winging it quite a bit. And one day I said, all right, I've got to stop this. I've got to write down the topics on which my clients are consistently asking me for a point of view.
Yep.
What are those? And it was surprising to me, and it's almost embarrassing. It came up with 55 topics that I didn't have a clear point of view on. So just thinking really carefully, and I guess everybody's different, but I'm never going to articulate a clear point of view unless I am forced to speak on that or write on it, because those are embarrassing things, right? So that's where it starts.
So let me touch on what you've said, because I think I have a similar worldview, but maybe use some different words, have a slightly different twist. So I'd love to sort of back and forth with you on this. So the first thing, when you called sort of the positioning, I call that solve for X, right? So a client comes to us and says, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a leadership person, I'm a salesperson, I'm a management person. And I'm like, okay, the world doesn't need another leadership expert.
Right?
Right. And the world doesn't need another sales expert. So what is you're the X guy or gal. What is that? I call it platform, right? So what's your platform, right? And the platform is not the title of your book, but this is the thing that people will know you as. And the problem when your clients are really, really smart is there's lots of things you could do, might do, and there's many of those things that you could do or might do that you'd actually do fairly well and better than average, but finding the thing that you are better at than anybody, or as good at or better at than anybody, and then sort of being known for that and having the courage to say no, right? So I'm really good at dealing with high risk decision making for senior leadership teams in the technology space. I just made that up, right? So that means you got to say no to things that don't fit there, because you want to be the high risk decision making in the technology space guy. Second point I'll make is, you call this sort of what's keeping your clients up at night. We talk about pain points, right? So what are the things that you actually have the solution to? What are the pain points, right? And then the third thing is really defining who your clients are. We call them avatars, but not, if you're in the leadership space, oh yeah, well, anybody that's a leader. Okay, well, how do you define that? There's 40 million leaders out there and you're going to be equally good to all of them? I don't think so. Is it a newly minted leader? Is it a leader in a second generation family business in the Midwest? Very different people, right? So push back on any of those you agree with, disagree with.
Oh, I'd love to disagree just because it might be fun, but I don't actually. I think it's exactly what I'm saying. And why is it that we don't take the approach that you've just described? It's often because of fear. For some reason, we fear that we'll run out of opportunity when that's never occurred to us once in the past. And so we're always dabbling, afraid that something will run out, we won't have a way to make a living. And it's a very odd feeling, because when you go through a successful life and you pause and look back on it and you say, all right, I was successful. What kept me from being even more successful? Is it because you ran out of opportunity? It's never that. It's because you didn't focus on and choose between the opportunities that you did have. So I'm completely on board. We're using different language, but the concepts are exactly the same.
So maybe that's why I love your book so much. It felt like I might have written it or something.
Yeah, well, the second edition, you can, if you want, it can be yours. You can have it.
There you go. We'll talk about the rights after. If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So let's talk about the different ways that an expert that is obviously entrepreneurial can monetize that expertise, right? Speaking, coaching, consulting, video-based learning, digital learning. I mean, there's things going on in the world now that are making face-to-face a little bit of a problem, to say the least. But give me a sense of what your view is on how do you decide what lanes to play in, the underlying business models, and what lanes to not.
Well, one of the things that I think has changed in our world is that we could answer that question exactly right, but we have to keep asking ourselves that question every 3 or 4 years because the world is
Mm-hmm.
changing pretty quickly around us, right? And then before I even answer that question, I think, and this is counterintuitive, but I think we should view this as an opportunity to give away, not make money on it, but to give away all kinds of brilliant insight, but it's unapplied brilliant insight. And then there's a very firm dividing line. So all of these prospective clients who may never pay you any money
Mm-hmm.
are benefiting from what you're writing or you're speaking or whatever it is. And then some of them, they're so impressed with the depth of your thinking that they will be willing to pay you a lot of money. So you have to keep that equation. So I'm a big believer from a thought leadership standpoint that I should give away tons of insight. And the more I give away, the easier it is to close the sale when I'm charging a lot of money to a few people who already have a sense of what I'm going to say, but they want to pay me to advise them and
Yep.
just to apply it in a very particular. So I'm not using unknown tools. I'm bringing the same tools to the table every time, but I'm pulling different ones out because every client has their own unique form of dysfunction.
So I want to violently agree with that, right?
Okay.
So, and I think there's a school of thought that says, no, you got to hold back the goodies and don't show them everything. And I'm like, BS. I'm like, the reality is the folks that are going to do the do-it-yourself piece today, great. They wouldn't have been your clients today. Many of them will grow at some point to become a client or not. And even if not, it didn't hurt you. There's no, it's not a zero-sum game. However, for those that really have the problem that is of the scale and the magnitude that it's worth making the investment to bring in the guy or gal to fix it, the fact that they're fluent in the way that you think and your methodologies and your frameworks, et cetera, makes that buying cycle and the working relationship easier because there's no black box, there's no mystery. You told them up front, you published up front, this is exactly how we're gonna work together.
Yeah, and if they're going to pay you a lot of money, I think they have a right to know how you are going to solve their issue. So otherwise, the alternative is that you start solving the issue before you get paid in an attempt to impress them. Instead, you say, listen, I don't know how we're going to solve this yet because I haven't dug deep into what you're facing. But I can tell you that in the past, I have used this methodology that keeps changing every year, and it inevitably leads to the right answer. So as soon as you start paying me, then I will start carrying. You may not say that, but
so I think that's a good point, because what people don't realize on the buy cycle, on the sales cycle, is your work actually does a sales job of getting people to third base, right? So if you have to first spend all this time educating prospects on your worldview, your perspective, the tools that you use, how you use them, where you've used them before, you don't get paid for any of that, right? Right? So if your content can do that, as it should, that actually saves you a boatload of time. And we're, for us, it's, we put out a lot of stuff in various formats. We have lots of people that reach out to us and say, hey, I've been following your stuff for 5 years online, on Twitter, LinkedIn, videos, whatever. And now is the good time for us to talk. And we get on a call, and it could literally be a one-call close. And they're quoting me to me because they know our stuff. So I don't have to do all that work. And that, I think people don't have the faith that is actually the truth, but
what I found as well. Right. Yeah. I have this perspective that viewed well, experts ought to view marketing and sales as sort of a whack-a-mole approach. So if somebody expresses some interest, then very kindly push back a little bit. And if the opportunity is real, it will continue surfacing. My podcast partner, Blair Enns, he has this phrase he uses all the time. He says the sale is the sample. So in the conversation that I'm going to have with a prospective buyer, they're going to see how they will have those same conversations. So if I'm in the business of charging for my expertise, then I shouldn't be giving it away to people because I don't want to teach that as well. Now, I don't mind giving away a lot if it's unapplied, but I don't want to give away the applied expertise.
Yeah, so let's talk about so that's a good point, right? So the difference between the unapplied and the applied is the unapplied is these are my frameworks, these are my models, etc. Right. The applied is solving your problem for you at this point in time, which requires the meter to be run, right? So it's okay to spend time talking about the unapplied, the theoretical, right? And that's where your content can come in. Like we know, and I'm sure you have a similar process, David, you talk to somebody and say, you know what, I'm going to send you some things to take a look at. it feels like a similar situation to where you're in, whether it's
Mhm.
a case study or a piece of content that you've written, and then they go, "Oh my God, you've done, yeah, that does sound like me," right? Except, mine comes in purple or something.
Right.
It becomes really obvious to the buyer why it's not fair to ask you to solve their problem now until they're a client.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly the way it should happen. And I I don't know. I don't quite know where we've lost our minds on this front. We feel like sales is such a fragile process, and that if we make a single mistake in the negotiation and all that stuff, and we don't dare ask more money, so I'll make a confession here. I don't give out references to anybody, and I explain why. There's a 5-point reason. I point people
Mm-hmm.
to that. Every service is 100% prepaid and is non-refundable.
Yep.
And that's the way it's been for 26 years. And people hear that and they say, how in the world, how do you make that work? And you make that work by just being willing to be a little bit different, and by putting enormous effort into your thought leadership, so that there's never any question about how the process will look and what your credentials are. That's the beauty of thought leadership. It's one of the most, it's a better invention than the wheel in my mind.
So I just want to comment on that because we're almost aligned but slightly off. So
Okay.
my model is, when people ask, for a testimonial or reference or something, one is there's a zillion of them on the site. So
Right.
that's one place to point them. There are some that do it. Usually what I find is it's they think they need to, but it's or they're risk averse or whatever. I'll say to them, that's great. Out of respect to my client's time, I'll be happy to give the name of 3 or 4 people that are, that I helped through a similar scenario to you. However, prior to doing that, I need a commitment from you that we're going to go forward. We're going to pencil in a date, and I'll give you 4 or 5 days to go talk to these people, and then we're committed. Which means I'm not contracting it. It's not a contract at that point, but I'm asking for the commitment. And if they're not willing to give it, I'm not going to give them the reference at that point. That's how I've sort of sniffed out the tire kickers. In terms of fees, I'm quite similar to what you do in terms of, we typically get paid all or most upfront, depending on the project that, if it's a longer project with milestone, but any of our initial engagement, we get paid upfront in full when you book us, and that's the end of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
I think your approach to references is really interesting. I do have testimonials on the site with specific people, not just Jenny G in Omaha, which you'd never know who that is, right? They're real people, and they could look them up as they want. I don't want, it seems like people ask for references just out of instinct. They don't kind of know what to do next, right? So all I'm illustrating is that we don't have to follow the normal rules. If we're experts, we can think about the process differently.
Well, and I've never lost a deal because of references. Because when you think about the whole reference process, do you really think I'm going to send you someone that says I'm an idiot?
Right.
It's and I think you're right. In certain industries, yes, go, put out an RFP, get 3, blah, blah, blah. I'm not in that space. You're not in that space. Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's understanding what are they really looking for when they're articulating, a reference.
Right.
Maybe they're not ready. They're not there yet. They're not totally confident yet. As we start to wrap up here, David, any additional thoughts in terms of, so far you and I are on the same page on almost anything. Any thoughts or recommendations to folks out there, maybe in the form of, immediately, if you're doing this, stop it, or if you're not doing this, start doing this right now?
Wow. Well, when business takes a slight downturn, the biggest danger, whether it's now or 5 years from now, I think the biggest danger is giving up that expert positioning that you've worked so hard to earn. And so if people are going to water down how tightly they're defining their clients, then I would just urge them to think really carefully about only doing that privately rather than publicly. That would be one thing. But maybe the biggest thing is, you hear people say this joke all the time. It's a story about the cobbler's son who has no shoes.
Yes.
That's funny the first 483 times you hear it. But it just pisses me off after a while, because here you are asking people to treat their business seriously, and you don't have the guts or the discipline to do it. And that just disgusts me over time. So treat your business seriously. And then when tougher times come, you'll have a strong foundation, because spinning that marketing flywheel up takes an enormous amount of effort, and it doesn't happen quickly. If you are really an unpositioned firm, you don't know exactly who your
Sure.
target is, and you don't have lead generation, it can take 9 to 12 months before you see
Easy.
any fruits from that. So start it now.
And just on that last point you made, I think that's critical, because we live in this, immediate gratification. Let me go do something on Google and it costs per click, and, like this bing, bang, bang, I can put up a campaign today and, watch clicks tomorrow. It is invaluable to have a proper marketing system in place where that flywheel just pays dividends over and over again.
Right.
You will not get there if you've got this, suffer from short-termism where, I ran a campaign for 2 weeks. Okay, that's a campaign. Like, it takes time, it takes investment. People need to feel comfortable with you and your work, and they might be doing it from the bleachers for a while, reading it, but it does pay massive dividends over time.
I add about 70,000 words of insight to my website every year because I love to write something every week. So there are almost 2 million words there. And even if nobody's reading them, it's so satisfying to me to get a little bit of additional clarity on a particular topic. And then the next time it comes up, I don't have to stammer around quite so much. So I just really believe in that. I hope that your listeners take it seriously as well. The fact that they're listening to this podcast on thought leadership would indicate that they do take it seriously. So that's
exactly right. Or they downloaded the wrong podcast. We're sorry. Anyway, this has been fantastic, David. I urge y'all to get a copy of The Business of Expertise. It was phenomenal. And I appreciate everything that you've shared and violently agreed with me today. It validates my thinking, if nothing else.
Thank you for having me, Peter. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.